Hello everyone. Unfortunately, family annihilation is not a new topic. One of the most notorious family annihilators in recent years being Chris Watts. But last month in January, we were introduced to two more men who decided to destroy their families along with themselves. According to Hannah Scott, who is a professor of criminology at the University of Ontario's Institute of Technology, and I quote, "Men are typically fueled by revenge or anger. Financial crises, DV, and a recent divorce or estrangement are often cited as factors. Statistics also show that the majority of family annihilators are also white men in their 30s or 40s. And today we're going to be discussing two men who fit the bill, Christopher Wood and Michael Haight. In January of 2023, 51-year-old Christopher Wood would tell his estranged wife, "This is how it ends for us." The very next day, tragedy would strike in Baldwinsville, New York. On January 20th of 2023 at 8:31 a.m. A woman would call police and tell them that her 14-year-old daughter Ava Wood had not shown up to school and she would like a welfare check on her. This woman was Heather Wood, who after being notified her daughter hadn't shown up to class, she had gone over to her estranged husband's home. Once there, she noticed that there were vehicles in the driveway, but no one was answering the door. It would turn out that Heather and Christopher were separated and Ava's primary residence was at her father's home. So police would arrive at 6 Triangle Place in Baldwinsville, New York. Once there, the story seems to go that Heather provided the police with the keys to enter the home, and inside, police would find something horrific. A mother's worst nightmare. 14-year-old Ava would be found inside of her bedroom in her bed with a gunshot wound to her head. Her father, Christopher, would be found in a separate bedroom with what looked like a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Now, it would turn out that both Heather and Christopher have been involved in 2 prior DV incidences, but neither of these incidences were said to have been violent. The most recent incident was said to have happened a day or so prior. Christopher was said to have been depressed and he was sending harassing text messages to Heather. During Christopher's contact with Heather, he said, "This is how it ends for us." The other incident happened in March of 22, so nearly a year prior, and it involved a stalking incident where Christopher was said to be stalking Heather. Now, there's not much more information on any of this. Honestly, there's not even a photo of Christopher online that I can find. Really curious about these prior incidences, what the stalking involved, all of those details, but this case is fairly recent. It only happened a couple weeks ago, and so there's not that much information on it as of now. We do know, however, that just 16 days prior to Christopher taking his own life along with his daughters, he purchased the 20-gauge shotgun. So in my opinion, that kind of shows that this was kind of pre-planned. Sheriff Toby Shelley would be quoted saying, and I quote, "In my 29 years of law enforcement, this is one of the most challenging scenes I've ever walked through," unquote. So let's talk about Ava for a second. Ava was a 9th grader at Durkee Junior High School. She was an honor roll student who was involved in track and field and played soccer in school. There were quotes about her saying, and I quote, "She always brightened everyone's day with her infectious smile. Her light still shines so brightly in our hearts and always will. Ava loved to play soccer. She was as competitive as they come. She was kind, gentle, and had the most loving spirit. She loved her teammates and her friends and shared many memories on and off the field with them. She was deeply adored by her mama and her family, and she insistently stole the hearts of all of those around her." Ava's obituary also describes her as being known for having strong relationships with her family and friends, and says she was born with a competitive spirit and a love for life. Ava sounded like an amazing young girl who deserved to grow up and live out her dreams and enjoy her sports and spend time with her family and her friends, but unfortunately, her father decided to take that away from her, for maybe reasons we will never understand. And we see this happen a lot in family annihilation cases where the parents are going through a separation or divorce, and then one parent decides to punish the other by taking the child away from them, whether that be by fighting to get full custody and then, going off with them so the parent never sees them again, or in cases like these with family annihilation, where they decide to kill the children to, in a way, punish the other parent. And in my opinion, that's what it sounds like this is. Now, again, we don't have much information. We may never know why Christopher decided to do this, but if we look back at previous cases, this seems to happen quite often, and it seems to be a trend. But it's sick and it's horrific to use a child as a pawn and to kill an innocent child to get back at the other parent. Now, it seems like he did have some mental health issues going on, and that's definitely something to consider. But in the grand scheme of things, he is a coward. He killed his own child for little to no reason. There was no reason to take Ava out with him. So in the end, my heart goes out to Ava's family, especially her mother, Heather. I I can't imagine what they're going through. But I think it's really worth looking at cases like these to hopefully change things for the future. The second case we're going to be discussing today is the Haight family massacre in Utah. This case, however, has a lot more information compared to the Woods case. On January 4th of 2023, police in Enoch, Utah would arrive to an idyllic family home still decorated for Christmas. However, inside they would discover the remains of 8 people, who are as follows. Tasha Haight was 40 years old and the mother to the 5 children who were found inside the home deceased. 17-year-old Macy, 12-year-old Briley, 7-year-old twins Amon and Sienna, and 4-year-old Gavin. Tasha was described by family and friends as the most kind and generous person, and it was said how she would never say anything ill about anyone. She was the kind of person that would give the shirt off her back to anyone, and she would serve people tirelessly. Tasha's 78-year-old mother, Gail Earl, would also be found deceased in the home. Mayor Chestnut said that Gail had been staying with the family to help her daughter and to provide support during the difficulties that the family was facing. She was the grandmother of these children. She wanted to be there to help support her daughter and her grandchildren, and she unfortunately was also murdered. And then the last person that was found was 42-year-old Michael Haight, who was the patriarch of the home. But what happened here and why? Why were these 8 people dead? Michael Haight and Tasha Earl were in their early 20s when they met as students at Southern Utah University, and then they eventually were married in May of 2003. Both were members of the LDS faith. Michael was a former Boy Scout who served his missions in Brazil, while Tasha studied child development at university. The couple ended up settling in Enoch, a small town in southern Utah about 250 miles south of Salt Lake City, and Enoch is made up of about 8,000 residents, mostly which are Mormon and members of the LDS Church as well. Michael Haight would eventually find work as an insurance agent, and the two would later build their family, having the 5 children that would later end up deceased in the home as well. By all accounts, the Haight's were a picture-perfect family. They lived in a large, beautiful home. They lived on a quiet, very friendly street. And by all outside appearances, by most of their family and friends, the Haight family was very happy and active in their local church. Neighbors talked about the family hosting a walkabout in 2021 to get the neighbors all together. They spoke about how welcoming the Haight's were when there were new neighbors, and they would try to be the first to introduce themselves to the new neighbors. But their appearance seemed to just be a facade to the reality that was actually happening inside of those 4 walls. And we see this so often in family annihilation cases. Jacqueline Campbell, who is a professor at Johns Hopkins School of Nursing and an expert on intimate partner and DV, told Business Insider, and I quote, "Neighbors will often say, 'Oh, he was a nice guy. I can't believe this happened. It seemed totally out of the blue.' And I think to myself, probably not," unquote. And I feel like we've seen that a lot with the Chris Watts case. From the outside, the Watts family seems picture perfect. And, that's how they try to appear, not only to their neighbors and their friends, but also, online as well on social media. And I think this is exactly what was happening here. And it would turn out that the Haight's didn't have a picture perfect life like they were trying to portray. In August of 2020, Michael Haight would end up being investigated by police after he was accused of child abuse of his daughter Macy. And this was after an outside individual ended up reporting him to police. It would also turn out that the Department of Family and Child Services was already aware of this family, and they had already had issues with them. In an interview with police, Macy, who was then 14 years old, would end up telling the officer that her father had been physically and emotionally abusive towards her multiple times over the recent years, describing 3 separate incidences in which she said her father physically grabbed her, choked her, or shook her. During one encounter, she told police she was scared her father might kill her. Macy also told police her father Michael often yelled and belittled her mother Tasha in front of the kids, calling Tasha stupid and lazy. Macy also said that her father would often take her mother's cell phone away to keep her from leaving the house. All of those things we've heard before in different, DV situations. Now, police would later interview Michael Haight, who denied having ever grabbed his daughter in an assaultive way or choking her, though he later would clarify that if he had done so, he didn't mean it to be an assault. So what does that mean? Michael Haight also denied ever putting down his wife in front of the children, but said that he did lose his temper with the children. During his chat with police, Mike would also mention that it had been a tough year for him, citing increased stress, blaming his father's death and his brother's divorce on this stress. He also accused his wife, along with his soon-to-be ex-sister-in-law, of saying mean things about his own mother and sister, which he said prompted him to take Tasha Haight's phone and look into her messages for evidence. He also admitted to once taking his wife's iPad to work with him for several days to look through her messages. When she accused him of stealing the device, he denied it and later slipped the iPad back where he had found it. So many red flags. Everything that came out of this man's mouth, in my opinion, was a red flag. Now, after Michael was interviewed by police, Tasha ended up contacting the department and wanting to talk to the officers, and she wanted to ask them what she expected to happen when her husband returned home, and said that she was concerned that the family wouldn't be safe. So this means that Tasha said that she was scared. Their daughter Macy also said that she was scared of her father, and it seems like they were all trying to get help. On top of that, in my opinion, it seemed like Michael was admitting to multiple things. Yet the officers in the end would end up doing nothing and would just basically tell Michael to go get help for his anger issues. Meaning, in my opinion, this was a cry for help, and this family should have been helped, but they weren't. They were let down. This family was let down by the police. There were signs, so many signs and so many red flags. Yet the officers brushed it off and said that they didn't think Michael would respond violently, and there was insufficient evidence to pursue charges. After nearly 20 years of marriage and about 2 years after this involvement where the police had come, court records would show that Tasha filed for divorce on December 21st of 2022, just about 2 weeks before the 8 family members were found dead inside that home. And we all know what happens in these cases where there is a man who needs to be in control and he realizes that he's losing the control that he has. Divorce and separation is a huge mitigating factor in these family annihilation cases. Michael Haight was also said to be an Allstate insurance agent at this time with an office in Cedar City, but he had either quit his job or had lost his job about a week before the murders took place, but it's not really said what happened with that job. But if he did lose this job or quit his job, it could be another thing that would have added to Michael's stress. Financial issues. Because after all of this happened, his wife filing for divorce, something going on with his job, just 2 weeks later, Michael would murder his entire family. The Haight family would end up being discovered after Tasha Haight was reported missing after she had missed an appointment that she had scheduled, in advance. When police ended up conducting that welfare check, they would discover the family dead. It was then determined that Michael had shot his entire family before turning the gun on himself. This horrific tragedy has affected not only the family, but the small town where it took place. It turns out that the mayor, Jeffrey Chestnut, was actually neighbors with the Haight's, and he was quoted saying, and I quote, "It's not too often something like this hits very close to home. In fact, the Haight's were my neighbors. The youngest children played in my yard with my sons. Enoch City is a very close community." Mayor Chestnut also mentioned that the night before the murders, that Tasha and one of her daughters attended a church activity. So they were out in the community, they were hanging out with their neighbors, and they were living their lives. Now, after hearing all of that, I think you're going to be appalled to find out that after murdering his entire family, his innocent children, a mother-in-law who was just trying to help, and a wife who was trying to hold it all together, Michael's obituary would come out and people were pissed. The internet calling it grotesque, vile, and gaslight nation. According to Desert News, the obituary, which was published on January 11th and also in a printed version, according to photos circulated on social media, painted a favorable picture of Haight as a father, a community member, and a businessman. It noted he coached his children's favorite sports teams, attended their concerts, and accompanied them sledding. It also described Haight's commitment to service to his church and his community. And after murdering his entire family, somebody had the audacity to write in his obituary, and I quote, "Michael made it a point to spend quality time with each and every one of his children. Michael enjoyed making memories with the family." Unquote. Like, what? Who approved of this? They honestly couldn't have written anything worse, in my opinion. And I get it. I'll play devil's advocate for a moment for a true monster. Because his family, I'm sure, loved him. I'm sure his family loved him. And I'm sure people had memories with him that were positive. Not everything is black or white. I get that. But this obituary is a slap in the face to the children, wife, and mother-in-law that he murdered. Saying that he liked to spend quality time with them when he literally just murdered them all. It's disgusting. And in my opinion, the good doesn't outweigh the bad in this case. I don't think he should be remembered as a family man and a person of God. I really don't think he should. I think he should be remembered for what he did and how he chose to end his life, as long with his family's. He's a monster. And it's sick and disgusting to sit there and pretend that he's not. Again, I don't know who decided that this would be a good idea to publish. I don't know who signed off on it. Not when there were 7 innocent people being buried. That is the most disgusting thing anyone could have said. But I want to know how you all feel about these 2 cases. The second one definitely has gotten more news time. There's more information on it. But I think both of these cases show good examples of men that end up murdering their families and the factors that lead to it. There seems to always be signs, and I hope people talking about these signs more often and these cases can hopefully prevent things like this from happening again. In both cases, the wives and or children were reaching out for help. They contacted authorities, yet nothing happened. And you think after how big of a story Chris Watts's was and all the other names that have piled up before and after his, you think something would change, but it doesn't seem to. The signs are still being ignored. Statistics show that 77% of DV-related homicides occur upon separation, and there's a 75% increase in violence upon separation for at least 2 years. Meaning when these women decided to separate or divorce their abusive partner, the risk of them being murdered increased 75%. Yet when they contacted the police saying that they're scared, they got brushed off. In my opinion, that's what it seemed like. And I'm not just saying men do this and the women are always victims. There's definitely cases where the men are victims, and the women are the violent ones. I'm not saying that. But right now we're specifically talking about men who annihilate their families. We can do a separate video about the women because there's just recent cases now. But from what I've seen, I don't have the statistics here. Men mainly murder their families due to things like finances or divorce, things like that. Whereas when women murder their children or their families, it's due to like psychological reasons. May that be postpartum depression, stuff like that, etc. But either way, something needs to change. So let's continue this conversation down below in the comment section. Maybe we can do a deeper dive into this topic. If you're interested, let me know. Like dedicate an entire video to family annihilation and not just like specific cases, but just the topic in general. Or if there are any cases even that involve women that annihilate their families, we can talk about that as well. In the end, I want all of you to keep these families in your hearts because these cases are still very new. They're very fresh. They only happened in the last few months and it's still probably very raw for them. But I think talking about these cases is the only way that we can hopefully keep spreading the word and keeping this topic in the forefront, and hopefully talking about these signs and these things happening will help stop it. With that, if you're not subscribed and you want to continue talking about these topics with me, I do recommend hitting that subscribe button. It also allows me to continue creating videos like this and spending more time creating videos like these and talking about these topics. I hope you all stay safe out there. Remember to lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.